Mozambique's second city, Beira, is making an effort to clean up its environment. The city produces around 300 tons of waste every day, but has a very precarious waste management system. One recycling association is trying to keep the streets clean with a little help from the residents. CGTN's Vauldi Carelse has that story.
When Alfonso Masinge lost his job last year, this became a lifeline. The spot where he brings the trash he collects on the streets. On good days, he'll find around 12 kilograms of rubbish. For that, he'll earn $2.
My day starts at 5 o'clock in the morning. I go around the bins in town because that's the time people dump their waste. I wash it, mark it, and then by 11 o'clock, I arrive at the eco point to sell it. Sometimes it's not enough, but I don't want to beg, and this helps feed my family and also protects my pride.
Mozambique's Recycling Association, AMOR, is responsible for putting up the recycling points.
The sea is the first place where all the waste of the city are going. Like when it's raining, everything's going to the sea, and if you walk a little bit around, you're going to see that the sand is full of trash. So yeah, this is one part. And the second part is because Beira is under the level of the sea. So it's a city that has a really specific relationship with water, because as soon as it's getting rainy, we have floods in different parts of the city. So right now the municipality is working on the rehabilitation of the drain throughout the city, and we want to help this process, like doing more raising awareness about the relationship between the floods and the way that people manage their waste.
The waste collected by Masinge and the hundreds of other waste pickers ends up here, Beira's only recycling plant. Tons of plastic that would have ended up in the sea is collected, put into a grinder, turned into a fine dust that will eventually be sold to make other products.
I like it to do this job because in my professional I can see it's very good to help the people. Sometimes the people didn't have a job, he looking for the waste, he come by, he have something. The country not coming dirty, so we take the waste, we're doing material.
And while the streets and drains in the city are cleaner thanks to these efforts, there's a lot more waste that simply ends up on the dump. Vauldi Carelse, CGTN, Beira, Mozambique.
And as we mentioned earlier, 7,000 delegates, including heads of state and ministers, are expected to attend the third United Nations Environment Assembly, which has kicked off this Monday here in Nairobi. The key meeting aims at finding solutions to combat the pollution problem, with the theme being towards a pollution-free planet. And for more perspective on this, we have Dr. Richard Munang in studio. He is the Environment and Regional Climate Change Coordinator at UNEP. Dr. Munang, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robin.
And my first question has to be, is protecting the environment too high a price for developing nations who are very keen to exploit any available natural resource to pay?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in studio, Penina. We are actually 2 years into implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, where head of states and governments in 2015 adopted to address issues of social inequality, issues of unemployment, issues of food insecurity, and also issues of pollution and land degradation. But today, the question of environment protection at a higher price is environment would not be at a higher price if there was no pollution, if there was no land degradation. And let's face this, as we're speaking today, the entire globe is spending $4.9 trillion US as a result of greenhouse gas pollution. And right down here in the African continent, every year the continent is spending $15 billion US, and this is projected to go up to $50 billion US as a result of the greenhouse gas pollution. And when it comes to indoor and outdoor pollution, the world is spending $5.3 trillion US. and the African continent is spending 400 billion US dollars, almost about 712,000 citizens dying as a result of indoor and outdoor pollution. When it comes to land degradation, the world is actually losing 10.6 trillion US dollars, which is almost equivalent to 17% of the entire global GDP. And in the African continent, the continent is losing 68 billion US dollars. So when you put this in perspective vis-a-vis the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, protecting the environment is not just the right thing to do, but it is the imperative that needs to be addressed if actually no one is to be left behind as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals.
And these are huge numbers that you're talking about. So what more can be done by individuals such as you and I, as well as organizations, to protect the environment?
The Paris Climate Change Agreement, which was adopted in December 2015, Section 5, clearly stipulated that action should involve each and everybody, state and non-state actors, individual citizens, civil societies, NGOs, policymakers, women and youth groups. All these, including the private sector, everyone have a role to play. And also in Agenda 2030 of the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 17 stipulates that inclusive partnerships is quite a necessary imperative. And so as we speak today across the entire continent, there are already initiatives, some led by the UN Environment, like the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation for Food Security Assembly, whose common intent is to bring each and everyone together, because if you can leverage the skills building on networks and already on ongoing initiatives and partnerships, we could be able to bring to the full solutions. And these are already happening across the entire African continent. For example, in Sierra Leone, addressing policy gaps, the country has brought together the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Finance to be able to put policies in place that can decentralize clean energy, which is not only helping to reduce indoor pollution that is killing a lot of people, but at the same time also help to add value to agricultural production. So the examples are glaring, and people, citizens across the continent, have been brought together to address this common challenge, pollution, to ensure that people and planet have prosperity.
And in light of what you've just said, for those who are very mindful of harmful practices against the environment and want to move away from that, what economic benefits exist perhaps in things such as the climate change reversal policies and action plans? What benefits can they derive from that?
The Paris climate change was adopted as a result of so many countries coming together, and the African continent submitted what was called the National Determined Contributions. And these are merely plans to put in place to be able to drive low emissions development. And these plans, agriculture and clean energy carries almost about 70% of these plans. And more so, what is good for the planet is also good for business.
Right.
And if you take the African continent, there are what we call catalytic sectors, what the continent actually have in abundance. It's agricultural land, which is 65% uncultivatable land in the entire globe. It is the sun, which the continent have in abundance. But if you look at the food insecurity issue in the continent today, 240 million citizens are going to bed hungry. And this is as a result of also inefficiency in the entire growth system that is costing the continent 48 billion. And this is because there's no value addition. So adding value using clean energy, which is in abundance in the continent. If you take solar, if you take wind, if you take geothermal, take hydro. So what needs to be done at the moment is that climate action or environmental action is actually an investment opportunity that can be able to create the jobs, not just for citizens, but most especially for the youth, who are currently 60% unemployed today. And examples across the continent, right down here in Kenya, where the example of M-Kopa, which is a mobile application combined with financial services and information communication technology, is not only helping to decentralize clean energy, but at the same time providing opportunities for kids to be able to study. And this is actually impacting almost about 400 citizens across the entire East Africa. And the examples go on and on. So what is very important is that environmental action, seen as a solution to investment, and climate action as an investment opportunity, is the way for Africa not only to drive sustainable economic growth, but also ensure transformational change.
And you mentioned 240 million people going hungry in Africa alone. That's huge. So when we talk about compensation avenues, such as carbon trading, for instance, talk to us about how those have helped to improve livelihoods of Africans.
With a changing climate today, there are a lot of international instruments, especially when it comes to finance. carbon trading being one of them, but more importantly, if you look at the cost of implementing climate action in the African continent today, Africa needs 15 billion every year. Africa will need 50 billion if the world was to hit 2 degrees, and as we speak today, the world is currently at 1.1 degrees, and so we're just 0.9 degrees shy away of the 2 degrees. This means that even if the Green Climate Fund, which is actually supposed to be capitalized up to $100 billion US, but we speak today is just about 10.3 billion US dollars. The continent of Africa still needs innovative ways to be able to generate internal revenue to implement this. And Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, Section 2, talks about voluntary contributions. And this then means, in addition to international mechanisms like carbon trading, like the Green Climate Change Fund, Africa then will have to leverage on its comparative strengths and start seeing how they can be able to raise revenue and invest it in areas that are catalytic. And this is already happening across the continent, where, for example, if you take Nigeria, they put in place what is called the Nigeria Incentive Risk Sharing Agricultural Lending. But working with the UN environment, the integration of clean energy and also nature-based actions that are not only going to reduce the risk in the agricultural system to avert crop failure, but it's helping incentivize private sector investment, especially finances into the agricultural sector, but doing so with aim to ensure that clean energy can be uptake, and that will not only reduce pollution, but will help catalyze investment. So in a nutshell, finances to drive low emissions development in the African continent and reduce indoor and outdoor pollution and reduce ecological degradation will come when environment and climate change is seen as a solution and more so as an investment opportunity.
I mean, that is obviously going to take a bit of time before the continent starts to see the benefits. But talk to us a little bit more about that. What African authorities, or African governments, I should say, can do to cushion the population against climate change risks such as drought that we are already seeing now. What can be done?
Very important question. Policy is the biggest driver of change, and already there are continental frameworks that are in existence. If you take the African Union Agenda 2063 with aim to create the Africa we want, if you take the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 with intent to leave no one behind, these frameworks already exist, but what is needed at the moment is to domesticate these frameworks in such a way that implementation of these actions are not only reducing environmental pollution, but at the same time also creating opportunities. And this is happening already across the continent, utilizing what already exists and the framework that I mentioned earlier, that the UN environment in collaboration with the African Union and civil societies and NGOs and private sector created in 2015. The intent was to ensure that each and every one's skills matter, each and every one talent matter, each and every one network and partnership matter, and to be able to tap into these. Human capital sometimes outweigh financial capital, and so the skills being brought about, especially by the 60% of the youth in the African continent today, if you tap into their skills and focus that towards these catalytic areas of agriculture and clean energy, they will be able to drive transformational change, but to do so, we leverage on what already exists.
Well, Dr. Munang, we appreciate those insights. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
We had here in studio Dr. Richard Munang. He is the Environment and Regional Climate Change Coordinator at UNEP.